There's my record button. Okay. All right. So welcome everybody. This is Google Drive 101. And today we're going to cover some basic navigation. We're going to talk about folders and docs, naming conventions for all those pieces, sharing permissions, and just overall organization of your drive. Again, I'm Allison Rogers, Instructional Tech here at RESA, and this is our once weekly EdTech support training. So to start, for Google Drive recommendations, you always want to use a Chrome browser. You always want to use your CC RESA G Suite account. So you want to make sure you're logged into the correct account, and that should now come with the CC RESA picture now that we got our pictures taken. And you can go to drive.google.com, and you want to house all of your work files in your Google Drive account, right? So you don't want to have a mix of maybe personal drive and CC RESA stuff. You want to have those two things separate. So if you want to follow along, feel free to go to your drive.google.com, or you can just kind of watch with me. So again, your RESA picture will pop up once you're in Drive, or when you're signed into your Google account. And you can also, if you're in, let's say, Gmail, you can click on this little waffle here, and it will take you to all these different options of apps. And you want to click on your Drive. So this is called the Apps Launcher, and you click on your Drive. Now, if this is something that is not how you normally find your Drive, stick with whatever you're comfortable with, but this is probably the quickest. If you're in any other app, go to your waffle and click your Drive. All right, so let's talk about some basic navigation. So navigating your Drive, you've got lots of different features, and we'll start on the far right and move down. So I'm going to hop into my actual Drive, and we're going to kind of go through all the different pieces that might help you navigate things a little bit better. So first and foremost, on the far right-hand side, you've got this list or grid view. So right now, you can see my view of my files is a little bit more like a traditional, like I like to see the actual folders, and then I can, click the little caret and it will bring me down into my subfolders within that folder, if they in fact do exist. And then I can also click here. There we go, there's my subfolders. And I can change it to the list view. So this is where if I had like files hanging out in my Drive, I can get almost that preview view. So I think it just depends on personal preference, but if you're someone who likes to be able to see what their docs and slides and all those things look like before having to go into the folder, perhaps this is the view, but my preference is the other view. If you go into the top right-hand side, this little gear icon, you click there and you click Settings. This will take you to all the different features. We'll get into this on another training, but the biggest thing to note here is that if you ever want to add different apps within your Google Drive, this is where you would do that. Okay, so I'm going to click Done for now. We'll come back to that. Next is where all of your files and folders live, right? So you might notice that if I'm in my Drive here, I've got this quick access option. So this kind of just previews files that I've been most recently in. And so it's kind of a quick little shortcut. Down below my Drive are all of the files that live in my Drive. So you can see I've created several folders, and all of the those various files live within those folders. So if you only have a couple folders, or maybe you don't have any folders, perhaps you haven't created them quite yet.
Allison?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
I hate to interrupt you, but I'm lost on the grid view. Can
okay.
you
Go back to that, sure.
Yeah, so the I always struggle with the Google Drive because it always looks like there's so much miscellany in there that I can never sort, especially the shared with me.
Sure.
There's so much stuff that just gets dumped in there by hundreds of people that I never can organize any of it. So I was trying to understand what you just did with that grid view. So the grid view is showing you folders and lists. I didn't quite follow that.
Okay, no, great question. So if I were to, maybe it's easier if I go into an actual folder. So let me hop into this folder. And now I've got subfolders in this folder. So I'm going to go into this actual folder here. And I could click this grid view, and instead of seeing the files listed like that, now I get an actual preview of like, oh, that's what that file looks like. So grid view gives you that, I don't know, preview of whatever is in each folder. Whereas if I were to click that again, it's just listing them like a kind of a traditional file folder. So you can click and unclick this whenever you want. The folks that like the preview version, they would stick with this all of the time, this preview, but it's totally personal preference. And it doesn't change the organization, like they're all going to be in the same folders and that sort of thing. It's just how you view them when you go into each folder.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're
That
welcome.
helps.
Great question. Okay, so back to the folders on the far left-hand side here. So if I'm in My Drive, again, this is where all of my folders live that I have created that I own, right? Now you'll notice that some of my folders have looks like a little person in the folder. That denotes that it is a shared folder, right? So this means that this folder has been shared with other folks, right? Now, I could have a folder that doesn't have a little person in it, but I could have maybe one file within that folder that's shared with someone. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of still have that privacy, but have things shared out to other people. And I'll get into that when I get to the sharing section. So just wanted to show you that when the people live in the folders, that means those folders are shared. If I scroll back up to the top here, and we'll touch on this in another session, but this priority piece, if you ever get stuck in there and you're thinking, what is this priority folder here? This is yet just another way to help you access documents that you've been frequently in. Okay, so you don't have control over what these files look like. It'll just be like, oh, you were just in this document, so perhaps you want to go in there again. Okay, and then I'll get into workspaces on another time, but this is also a way to kind of organize some shortcuts to your file folders, and there's a Tech Tip Tuesday on that as well. So we're going to live in My Drive today, and we are going to kind of walk through how to create some files and some folders just to help you kind of get organized. Okay, so the best rule of thumb when you're creating a folder to start is you always want to be in My Drive, or if you're creating a subfolder, you want to be in the actual folder that you want that subfolder to live, right? So just be very aware of where your cursor is when you create a folder. So when you do that, you click the New button, and it gives you the option to create a folder right here. So I click Folder, and then I would title it. I'm going to title this An Example so it lives at the top. It is alphabetized, so if I were to create a folder that has, starts with a Z, it's going to be at the bottom. If I create a folder that has a number to start, like for example, 3rd grade, then that would live higher up. So numbers are at the top, then it's alphabetical. All right, so here's my example folder. And now I can see that my example folder has been created. And keep in mind that it's very important to be aware of naming conventions for whether it's a folder or a Google Doc or whatever file you're creating, right? If you're not being consistent with your naming conventions, it's easy to kind of get lost in your own organizational system. So that's why naming conventions are pretty important. So let's say I want to create a subfolder within my example folder. So again, I don't want to be in My Drive anymore because I've already created the folder that lives in My Drive. I want to create a folder that lives in an example folder. So I take my cursor and I click on an example folder, right? Currently, there's nothing that lives there, but I'm going to say New Folder, and then this is my example subfolder. Create. Okay, so now I'm in an example folder, and I see that I have a subfolder. Now, if I wanted to see that visually differently, I could click the little caret, and now I see, oh, yep, there's my example subfolder that lives within an example folder. Okay. Now let's throw in a Google Doc in that folder. So let's say we'll start with it in the example folder, and then I'll show you how to move it to a subfolder. So again, I pick the folder I want it to live in. I click New. I click Google Docs. and then it will automatically default to an untitled document. So before I do anything with a Google Doc, my first rule of thumb is I always give it a title, right? It can get a little bit confusing when you have multiple untitled documents. So if you don't give it a name, that's what will happen. So this will be my test doc. I'm being overly creative with my name conventions here. And I'll just put some content in there. Okay. So now you'll notice that when I created this Google Doc, it popped me out into another tab, right? So how do I get back to my Google Drive? I just simply go back to that part of my Chrome, right? I just hop into the window that I was in before, okay? So if I want that Google Doc to live in a different folder, I would just simply, and I gotta refresh because it's not showing my Google Doc that exists in that folder. So if you ever think, gosh, I just put a document or a slide deck in a folder and I don't see it, sometimes you need to refresh. Sometimes it doesn't always catch up. It's there, you need to just click the refresh button. Yep, and there it is. So in my Drive, I go to my example folder, and there's the document, and there's my subfolder. So, oops, I actually wanted this to live in my subfolder. So all I have to do is simply drag and drop, and now it lives here. What if that was a mistake? Notice how it gives me a little time to undo what I did. Just click undo. Or if you don't go fast enough, you can go into that subfolder and you can simply drag and drop it to whatever folder you want it to live. So this functions very similarly to like your file folder on your computer, right? Like if you were to go into your documents and, drag and drop stuff, it functions just the same here, right? Drag and drop. Okay. Now there's another way to move folders, and this is this is the way that I use if I, for some reason, am in a Google Doc, such as this, and I don't know what folder it actually lives in, right? For some reason, I have it open and I'm like, I don't know where I put it. A nice little trick is clicking this little button up here. So I've got the name of the document, and then to the right of that, where it says move, I click here. And I can go here and kind of give myself a little cheat sheet, like oh, that's right, it's an example subfolder. So then I could go back to the Drive and actually find it within that folder. So it's a nice way to find something without having to search too much if you're not sure exactly where it lives. Okay, let's hop back into our little slide deck here. All right, so I want to talk about just the differences between the different files within Google Drive. I think we're all probably pretty familiar with Google Docs, and it's kind of Microsoft equivalent Word, right? Sheets equivalent would be Microsoft Excel, Slides equivalent Microsoft PowerPoint, Forms, I guess people could use SurveyMonkey, things like that. So if you're more familiar with Microsoft, this is kind of a nice visual to determine what these files' purposes might be, okay? Now, for me, the biggest benefit in using Google Docs is the sharing feature, and that you can work on the same document in real time with other people. And so you're not emailing, here's the most updated version of whatever project we're working on. It's everyone can see who's done what all in the same place. So that's the real benefit in using Google Docs. Okay, so we talked about folders, and we talked about naming conventions. We talked about Google Docs, and we talked about naming those as well. So with respect to Google Docs, you don't ever have to worry about clicking save. That is the beauty of this. That's another nice kind of like refreshing feeling of I don't have to worry if for some reason I close my computer or I X out of it accidentally. You're not going to lose it. This little all changes saved in Drive should give you some nice breath. You can just relax. It's not going to be gone. It's not going to be deleted. So there's no save button, so don't try looking for it.
Melissa, Allison, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you again.
That's okay. Good question.
So the slide that you showed just a minute ago that had docs, sheets, slides,
This one?
This one.
Yep.
So this P at the bottom, is that publisher? What is that?
This right here, this is PowerPoint.
It's what?
PowerPoint.
Oh, PowerPoint.
So
Okay.
the equivalent would be Google Slides versus Microsoft PowerPoint.
Okay, I got you. And then the other one is a Survey Monkey.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I would say the feature that I use probably the most when it comes to creating, presentations and templates and things like that would be the make a copy feature. So this is a massive time saver for, let's say you put a lot of work into a Google slide deck or a Google Doc, and you need to create a variation of what you created, but you don't want to start from scratch. Or maybe someone else has created a template that you want to repurpose. That make a copy feature, again, will be very beneficial. So let's go to my little sample doc and I'll show you how that works. So let's say this Google Doc is very robust and I want to make a copy of this. So I'm going to go up to the File button and then I'm going to click Make a Copy. It's that simple. Now notice that when it lets me make a copy, it will automatically put in the copy of whatever it was previously called, right? So again, back to naming conventions, I would always recommend at this point when you're making a copy that you automatically change the name. Instead of copy of, this is going to be Table Doc 2, okay? And a nice shortcut here is I can then tell it what folder to live in. If I don't want it to be in a different folder, then I just can leave it in the folder that the same one was in, or I can click back and I can throw it into a different folder within my drive. I can even create a new folder for this Google Doc to live in. So I can do all of that without having to pop back into my drive. This is just that make a copy feature. Okay, so I'm going to just keep it where it was. Another shortcut is I can share it with the same people, and I can copy comments and suggestions. So if for some reason this document had lots of comments from collaborators, or maybe it was shared with the same 10 people, if I want that to be the same, I just simply click the box. If I want to start from scratch but use the same template, I click OK. So I'm going to do that. So now it's going to pop me into another window. And a good rule of thumb here is once you've created your copy Google Doc and you're working from this new version, I would then go ahead and close the previous window. So go back into that original and close that out. I may or may not have gone into the original and made changes accidentally time and time before. So that's a nice little tip. Close out the original so you don't accidentally make changes in the original. So within the sample doc 2 now, you are now the owner and it starts from scratch. So if let's say you were making a copy of something that someone else owned, as long as they had those permissions enabled, you could make a copy and now it is no longer shared with anybody and you are the owner, right? So that's a nice way to kind of get like a clean version or a template version of whatever it is maybe you're borrowing. Now, if that is the case and you want to share it out, you still need to obviously share it to now the different people that you'd want to share it to. So speaking of sharing, I believe that is our next topic. So let's talk about sharing Google files and folders. So like I said before, this is to me the #1 reason why you would want to use Google Drive and the various features within it. So people can be in one document at the same time, doesn't matter where you are on the face of the earth, and you're going to be able to see each other's changes and collaboration in real time. So let's talk about some of the sharing permissions. So you create a Google Doc, for example, and you want to share it with people, but there's different ways that you might be able to share them. So for example, you can give collaborators can edit access, meaning they can type and change and alter the view of your Google Doc, right? So for what purpose might you have that? Whatever, if it's like a collaborative effort, that would be relevant. Can comment is another feature. Can comment would be, you don't want to necessarily give everybody editing rights, but you want to receive feedback so they can use the commenting feature and make their own suggestions. And then the last option is the can view. So you don't want anyone to be able to edit. You don't want anyone to be able to comment. You just want them to be able to view. Okay, so let's hop into a Google Doc and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to click the little blue share button. So I'm in my sample doc too. And right now I can see the little lock symbol. That means it's private to only me. So I click share and it automatically lets me start typing in people's names. So if I wanted to start typing in a name, notice that it will auto-populate people that are in my contact list. So maybe I want to share this with Melissa. I can just select her name. Now I can continue and add more and more people, right? I could even type in a group name. So if I wanted, like, you know, if I have groups set up in my contact list, I could select that whole list instead of having to individually type in names. But let's just keep it with 2 people for now. Here I can add a note. And notice this little bottom button here, notify people. This will send them an email. So you may have received an email before saying, like, so-and-so has shared a Google Doc or a Google Slide with you, right? If I unclick that, it will still share it with them. It just won't send them the email. Okay, so there might be different reasons in which you don't want to notify them. So maybe I'm just getting everything set up share-wise, but I don't want to notify them yet that it's being shared. It'll be in their shared with me folder, but they don't need that email yet. Maybe I plan on sending a separate email that's got links and directions and all that. That might be a reason why I don't click the notify people. Again, I can click this little drop down and determine what abilities I want them to have with this Google Doc. Do I want them to be able to can edit, can comment, can view, right? We talked about those features. So if I want them to can edit, I'll just keep it as is. But I'll show you a little tip for how I set up a lot of my documents that allow people to view and access, but I don't have to worry about people making changes. So I'm going to go ahead and take out these individual people. And instead of typing in individual names, I'm going to click this advanced button. Sometimes this advanced button gets lost in the shuffle, but this is the most powerful part. So I click get advanced, and it automatically gives me a link that I can share in an email. So instead of sending an email notifying people that I've shared it with through this method, I could go to my Gmail, copy this link, and throw the link in that way. So right now I have it private only to me. What I frequently do, I would say probably 90% of the time when I'm working with documents that multiple people need to be shared. So for example, our Google slide deck that we're using today, what I did was I clicked change and I said anyone with a link. So I click this button here and then I keep it with can view. So anyone who is given this link, right? You have to be given the link, but if you're given the link, you can view it, right? Now I could enable this for anybody at Clinton County Schools, but because I work obviously with our locals, typically I just stick with anyone with a link and then can view. I wouldn't recommend putting it public on the web. And I definitely wouldn't recommend this method if this was something that obviously had sensitive data, right? If this is something that's related to, you know, student data, you would absolutely want to share it with very specific people and not have that open-ended. But if this is something like maybe, hey, I want, you know, this is a resource for people that anyone should be able to view, but I just want them to be able to edit, anyone with a link can view. And then I click save. And I click OK. Before I click OK, before I click OK, I'm going to talk about this owner settings down here. This is something else that sometimes is missed. This prevent editors from changing access and adding new people, and then disable options to download, print, and copy. So if I was in fact going to share this with somebody, I could click these buttons if I wanted to kind of lock down the settings. So I'm still giving them the right to access and edit or comment, but I don't want them to be able to share it with anybody else. Okay, if I click this button. Prevent editors from changing access and adding new people. Now, let's say I'm in a collaborative group and one of my colleagues wants someone else added to the group. They can send a suggestion for that, but they can't do it themselves. So it kind of gives you a little bit more of the power to determine who in fact should be included, especially when it comes to editing, which I think is, for some documents, that's definitely needed. The second button is disable options to download, print, and copy for commenters and viewers. So if this button was enabled, let's say for the Google slide deck that we're using today, you would not be able to go to that Google slide deck and say, File, make a copy. It wouldn't be there because I have locked it down to say, you can view this, but you can't make a copy and make it your own, right? So it just depends on what your purpose is. But I think it's really important to note that you do have the ability to lock this down. So some people I think are a little bit nervous with, if you're talking about sensitive data, right? Well, should I use it in a Google Doc? Should I be able to share this and that? If you lock it down and only share it with certain people and only give those people the right to change the content and not share it, then I think you're in good shape. So after you make all of those changes, you click save, and then it is in fact shared with whoever it is that you want. I'm not going to share this awesome Google Doc with anybody, so I'm just going to click cancel and cancel. Okay. So those are kind of the 101s of sharing. I want to make sure I address two more things before we get to some questions. And the first is finding your files. I think finding your files and your shared with me drive can be probably some of the most tedious or confusing parts of Google Drive until you found your groove. Okay, so I frequently work with people and who are they've been using Drive, but they kind of feel like they're getting overwhelmed because there's just so much that lives in their shared with me drive, and it's very difficult to find their files. And so my recommendation is always to, like, starting from whatever moment that you feel confident to be able to do some of the stuff we talked about today, like organizing some folders, start there. So start with, maybe 1 or 2 folders a week that you start organizing, because if you try and organize your whole drive in one day, you're going to say, gosh, I'm never going to be able to, get a handle on it. But if, from starting today, any document, any slide deck, any folder, anything that's shared with you, once you get it in an email or once you get it in your shared with me folder, if you start putting that in a specific folder and naming it using the naming conventions, you're starting an organizational system for yourself. And then eventually you'll notice, I know where everything is, right? So for the time being though, if you still need to set up some time to organize your drive, which again, I'm happy to help individually if people want to set up some appointments with me on that, but I'm going to give you some tools in the interim. So up at the top where it says search in Drive, you can always just start typing in keywords to find whatever file you might be looking for. But there is an opportunity for advanced search. So if I click this little caret, it gives me even more options to search from. So I could search by the type of document. So let's say I know it's a Google Doc. Let's say I know that I own it. And you can pick and choose whatever filtering or you want to enable, right? So let's say I'm not exactly sure where it is, so I'll just leave it there. Date modified, we'll just say anytime. Item name or has the words. If you're like, I know this has the word Google Drive in it, I just can't for the life of me find it in my Google Drive, ironically. I can type in that keyword. I can even type in people that it's likely shared with. I can click follow up with, and we probably wouldn't be using these as much if you enabled those features. But even if you just knew that it was owned by you and that it had the words Google Doc, and you clicked search, it's then going to just pick up those Google Docs that contain Google Drive that I own. So it's a nice way to filter out some of the stuff that, instead of just going to your My Drive and just trying to like sift through and find stuff, right? Because not everybody might have as many folders set up for organization. This search feature will definitely be a time saver for you. I also want to show you the shared with me folder that lives down here, right? So shared with me, just to clarify for everybody, this is where documents live that folks have shared with you, right? So you might scroll through this and say, I don't even know what that document is. I didn't know that person shared this with me. It's not going to be it's not going to be a problem if you have a massive list within your shared with me. A lot of people are like, can I delete stuff that I don't know what it is or I don't need? I, as you can see, have a pretty organized Google Drive folder, or like my whole drive is organized with different folders. But my shared with me is, there's a lot going on in there and I don't even know half of what's in there, right? However, how I function within my shared with me is when I am shared something and I get a notification, or it's in an agenda and I know that that document is important, and then I'm going to reference it again and I want it to be in a place that I can easily access. Here is my process. Here's my workflow. Okay, so I'm going to find something super random to bring into my drive for you. So this sounds good. So digital menu for student, okay, great. So a good tip is if I were to be in my shared with me folder and I right click a document, I will know for sure if I have not brought that document into my Drive if this is enabled or this little box pops up, add shortcut to Drive. So what this means is it is not currently in my Drive, okay? Let me see if I can find one that is in my Drive that maybe, So the thing is, the problem is when I do this, every time I'm shared something, I automatically share it or throw it in my Drive. Anyway, we'll just use it as an example. Okay, so I think this one already lives there, yeah. Oh, yeah, it doesn't. Okay, anyway, so if I want to move this into my Drive, I click Add Shortcut to Drive. And I'm basically telling it I want it to be moved from my shared with me to my Drive, but I want to put it in a specific folder. So maybe I'll put it in that folder I created, which was called, I think, an example folder. Ah, yes. We'll put it in there. And we'll click Add Shortcut. Okay, so now that document, notice it still lives within the Shared With Me folder, right? It's kind of confusing, but it's actually living now in my Shared With Me folder, but also in my Drive.
Can you go over that? Just go do the steps one more time.
Absolutely, yep. So I just simply right-click whatever document I'm working in, or I want to move to my Drive, and I click the Add Shortcut to Drive.
Okay.
And once I do that, that's where it gives me the option, okay, cool, you want it to live in my Drive. Now, where in my Drive do you want it to live? And that's where I can click the little arrow and go through the folders and select the place I want it to live.
Okay, I gotcha. Right-click document, click.
And then add shortcut. So again, when you do this, this then prevents you from really ever having to go back to your shared with me folder, right? Because once it's in that folder that you put it in, now when you search for it again, you're just going to the folder that you already know exists because you created it. So ultimately, once things get shared with you on a daily basis, whether it's via email or in an agenda, if you open it up and see that little icon that I mentioned that looks like the little add to drive piece, throw it in your drive and throw it in the right folder, and now you have helped yourself organizationally. So if I were to go back to that folder, now I can see that the two things that I brought in are here. And they are in fact still in the shared with me drive. Last thing I want to mention about that is the shared with me is different than the shared drive. And I will talk about shared drive in another session, but just know that today we talked about My Drive, which is all of the folders and documents that you own that you've organized and put into folders. And the shared drive is things that's been shared with you. And again, you can move those things and put them into your My Drive. Sorry, that's shared with me. And then shared drive is something totally different that we will address later. All right. The last thing I want to mention is our organization, and we kind of talked about this a little bit already, in that, you know, when you drag and drop folders or documents, they function very similar to like the documents on your computer, right? So you can open new folders, you can drag and drop, and then you can also even upload entire files from your computer drive into your My Drive. So if this is something that you have not done yet and you're looking to sort of integrate all those pieces, the reason you might do that would be if, let's say you are, I don't know, working remotely, which we all are right now, and you want to be able to access your files wherever you are and whatever device you're on, right? So if you, let's say we're using like the share drive at RISA, or you had saved things to your desktop in your office at RISA, and you were not working on your desktop anymore, you're working on your laptop, well, you can't access those files if they're on your actual desktop or on the shared drive. But if you put them into your Google Drive folder, you can access them on your phone, you can access them on your laptop, you can access them on your kid's laptop, you can access them wherever you want because it is cloud-based instead of on the actual desktop in the office. So if that's something that you have not done yet and are interested in setting up, there are directions. If you click on this Drive file stream, it's the Google directions that take you to the step-by-step parts of getting Drive for your desktop or your laptop, whatever you're working on. And it lets you actually download it so that when you're working on those files, they're all seamlessly in one place and it doesn't matter what device you're on. So for organizational purposes, I get lots of questions about organizing your folders and, you know, moving things from your shared with me drive, and then also this downloading Drive. So if that's something that you might be interested or need additional support, feel free to reach out, set up a time to work with me, or, you know, play around with that on your own. And then if you've got questions, you know, email me, or we can set up a time. I also wanted to mention that with a lot of the Google Drive stuff that we've talked about today, within the CC RISA intranet, got help docs via Tech Tip Tuesday. So all you do is go to the intranet, go to the help docs Tech Tip Tuesday section, and then once you're in the YouTube channel, if you just type in Google Drive, you'll see all of the Tech Tip Tuesday tutorials that are specific to Google Drive. And so some of your questions that you might have after this session might even be able to be addressed just by looking through this list of videos. Okay. And last thing, I'll pop into the chat box in a second and address some of the questions that may have come up. But make sure you've completed the attendance form that's also in the chat for today. And we have a session next week, and that is Zoom for Beginners, and that'll be on May 13th at 1 o'clock. And again, each session will probably be, you know, 30 to 45 minutes, and then 30 to 15 minutes for questions at the end, and happy to follow up in any other way. So hopefully you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out. So I'm going to pop into the chat real quick and stop my recording.